I'm just like, wait a minute, I have to do something to be busy. Like that's what the entrepreneurial mindset is. Like you have to be busy, so then you get busy. And when you're busy, like that's when you're supposed to actually be working.
Yes, but staying busy, I mean, a lot of people see being busy as a bad thing. It's actually, I mean, some breaks here and there are fine, but we're humans, we need purpose, and we are driven by being purposeful and busy. And I don't think, probably the people who are complaining about mental health issues and not that it's everybody, but people complain about mental health issues and, not feeling depressed and all that stuff. They probably don't have a lot of purpose in their life. And the most purposeful people are the ones who have purpose and they wake up every day. I was reading a while ago, a couple years ago, there was some veterans rehab program, and the biggest problem with veterans, or one of the biggest problems, but for this rehab program was these veterans are basically, they join the Marines, Army, whatever, and they are mission focused, mission every single day. They have purpose, drive, and then they do that for 10 years, and then at the end of that, you go home, you wake up, and all of a sudden you're like, what is life? What is the world? Nobody's telling me what to do. Nobody's telling me what to wear. And especially the injured ones that were like, a lot of PTSD, or, maybe they have an injury that is, affecting their daily life. They found that these veterans, if they gave them purpose, that their recovery process would speed up. So they would be like, all right, you're going to teach a sports camp for soccer and you have to be there at 8 a.m. And, these veterans now know that they had 20 kids depending on them and they're going to be there. And that little mindset shift of having to wake up with purpose and, hey, I got 20 kids at this sports camp and I matter and they're showing up for me. And so I have to show up for them. And that dramatically changed a lot of the outlook and their recovery process. Not that that's a one size fits all, but it gives people purpose. And then in the boiler industry, tying it back into the main topic of this podcast,
I'm waiting for this curve back. I know it's coming.
I mean, every single day, if you're on the service side, you show up and it's probably one of the smallest cycles of problem and solution that there is. You show up to a customer's site and they give you a problem, you solve it, and you leave. And that very tight feedback solution gives a lot of service technicians a lot of purpose, especially when it's tied to like manufacturing, a lot of manufacturing processes. If you have 50 people working and the process goes down, a lot of times there's not really anything for them to do. So a lot of companies have weird things like, oh, we'll send people home with pay or without pay. Like it really depends. And a lot of people, oh, I want to go home. I want to do this. But, at the end of the day, they need their job. And, if you can get the boiler running, if you can get the steam running and get widgets going down the line again, or probably the one that affects everybody is, especially in the Midwest, is schools not having heat. And if schools don't have heat, I think I mentioned this on another podcast, is, all those parents now have to deal with their kids. And, if both parents work or, if single parent and they work, now their whole day is ruined and, they're trying to call daycare and do all this stuff, or they got to stay home, call off work. And that, boiler has flame failure. And now all of a sudden 500 parents are having to deal with, this big chain of events past that. So a service tech shows up, can get it running in an hour. It doesn't have to be this huge job. You can just get it running. Oh yeah, simple fix. Wire was broken. All right, you have heat again. Great. And now the school district can have school. And yeah, it's just, but
You
anyways,
just like you jumped right in my wheelhouse there. But before I like get like pulled into like, oh man, so many schools. Like I have a almost 5-year-old who's now right now at school, and yeah, if all of a sudden like something happened with that facility, it's like buckle this up. I don't care how important this is. You gotta get there. But like tying back to that purpose. So there's also this like fine line you can cross over. Um, because like there was if you ever are in Las Vegas and you're not a gambler, so you're kind of like really nerdy like me, there's a bunch of really awesome museums, and one is the Atomic Energy Museum. And it's like atomic weapons, atomic energy, and all about like everything from like Area 51 where it was originally testing and where all the test sites were to like the development of the bomb. And one of the things is they employed at one point on a Manhattan Project like 500,000 people, and for the most part, no one knew what the hell they were doing. So, like, basically, imagine you're in front of it'd be like, you're in front of a boiler and going around like you're taking gauges, but you have no idea what that means. You're just taking gauges and reporting things. So, like, one of the things is someone has this little thing that's kind of making these weird, like, dot noises. And, like, sometimes it dots a little bit faster, and they would just write those numbers down that they had no idea. Of course, that's like, the Geiger counter. We know that, but at the time, the people didn't know, oh, we were testing radiation. And the biggest problem they had, because they actually had like villages of people working on this, um, they couldn't keep morale up. And this is like during World War II, when like kind of people have this rose-colored vision of everyone was in it together. No, they were doing like bowling leagues, softball, like all this extracurricular stuff to try and get people to be happy about waking up, just because literally you have entire village here. I think like the largest city was like 20,000 people. They were all working for the Manhattan Project, but no one knew that. All they knew is they're doing something really important for the government, but they have absolutely no idea, and they have no idea how it ties in the war effort. They're just told it is, but you're doing things you don't understand. And so that's just like, you can probably tie that into your sort of like your person that goes in and isn't thinking about the big picture of stuff, how it affects things. And if someone's not trained to understand, okay, this is why you're taking these different gauges. This is why you're taking these different and on a boiler tech it would be like, yeah, your flu studies and things like that. That person typically burns out, and you're like, what? You're not doing that hard of work. Well, how'd you burn out all right? Oh, they didn't understand the purpose.
yeah, yeah. So, uh, we could tie this really great into water treatment. But if a person comes in and they say, "Hey, you need to pull this lever in the first of your shift every day," and you hire them and they don't know anything else, there's no other outside forces training them, and you say, "You pull this lever every single day," and they pull the lever every single day. That's my job. I pull that lever and then I go sweep the warehouse. I pull that lever, and then one day, they're sick or something and nobody pulls the lever. And then they walk in and they're like, "Wait, what if I don't pull the lever?" And then they just go about their business. And all of a sudden they haven't pulled the lever for a month. And they're like, "Wait, it doesn't do anything. I'm going to stop pulling the lever." You know what this happens? Testing for soft water. So I
Find it.
guarantee this is like the number one thing of why water treatment, why you stay in business is people come in, "Hey, on the first year shift, you are testing for soft water and water treatment, water treatment, water treatment." And they're filling out numbers in a book, and then the
Yep.
numbers start changing or they don't have soft water. And all of a sudden, but when the numbers change, nobody says anything. And they write down something like, "Oh, we have hard water." Nobody does anything, but the boilers are still running. The plant's still making steam. Widgets are going out the door. Then they write down, "Hey, we have hard water. We have hard water." They write it down for 2 weeks. Or they get busy and they don't test for 2 weeks. They don't test for a month. The boilers are still running. The boilers are still running. All of a sudden, though, you open them up for an annual and, oh, they're full of scale. Oh, how'd this happen? And it's like, well, we overlooked these daily little tasks that we should have been doing. And instead, we didn't drive that purpose, and the feedback loop for a boiler and for bad water treatment is so large that most people don't see it. And a lot of companies, it's not just the worker that's doing the water treatment. A lot of, there's a whole science to preventative maintenance. And if a company cuts preventative maintenance, all their machines don't just magically stop. But the same thing happens in the boiler room. They cut preventative maintenance. We don't need a contractor show up to quarterly to test combustion. We don't need to blow down the boilers. There's more important things. And they worry about those important things. And then all of a sudden, a huge tidal wave of problems comes and crashes down on them. And then they act shocked. But then they have to open up the checkbooks and write huge checks for stuff that is 100% preventable. And it's like remedial stuff of, hey, we just need to do these checks every single day. And when something gets out of line, we need to correct it. But that seems so easy and so trivial that most people are like, we got to go deal with the alarm bells, the pressing issues. And the only way I think you can solve it is training and structure. I mean, I don't know. You're the expert. Like, what do you see with water treatment? What are the places that do water treatment well that don't have a stationary engineer who just sits around and that's part of their job?
So do we want to do like the whole introduction first? Because we're rolling.
No,
So
so I
yeah,
don't. I found and I learned from another podcaster that introductions kind of people clam up and then they feel like it becomes an interview and
yeah.
not a conversation. And I've had amazing conversations on the phone that were like 2 hours, but then you get somebody and say, hey, we're going to do a podcast. And then they sit there like deer in the headlights. I mean, you could say who you are, and what you do, but, I learned from another industry guy who has a very awesome podcast that introductions are not natural. When you have a phone call,
Interesting.
you don't do introductions, and people are so frightened by the podcast aspect. They think there's like something wrong to say or something. And that's why I don't do introductions. Your name will be in the podcast title and in the description, but I found, not that I've done a ton of podcasts, but I've actually never really done the introduction
Mm,
because
interesting.
I've listened to other podcasts and people do an intro and the guest just sits there. And, these are not professional guests. These are industry experts, but they're like, oh, I'm on a podcast, and they clam up and they sit there and the conversation just gets like flattened. So that's why I don't do intros, but you can say your name, what you do. But we got another water treatment expert, on this podcast.
So I'm Brian Burgess, owner operator Chicago Water Treaters. I've been in water treatment for 15 years. Kind of born into it though. It's one of these things where, as we're talking about preventive maintenance, and training people, so I've probably trained probably a couple of dozen at least reps before, and when I'd say the biggest challenge is that first thing we're talking about there, when people don't understand it, it's like there is this really hard, like there is this chemistry thing that most people get focused on, like, oh, I've got to know like what pH means, what alkalinities mean. But I'm more focused on, no, we're applications engineers. Like, I mean, do you know offhand what 1 bar means in pounds per or yeah, you probably do know in PSI the conversion off the top of your head. But if you were to look at something where you're like, okay, what is in Kelvin 1 degree? Like um so people tend to get focused on that instead of, all right, hey, there's these values, you're gonna learn what they mean as you're using them. But just kind of stay curious on it. So then you're always kind of like your brain is always open to kind of figure out like, oh, okay, I have this scientific definition. Like conductivity is an electrical conduit going through water, is how much electricity water conducts, and it relates back to total dissolved solids. But like that's all very scientific wording. I just kind of like think of, all right, how can I put this in words that my brain understands? And then what does it do? Oh, well, if my TDS gets too high, my total dissolved solids or my conductivity, it's kind of like a cloud and rain. When clouds get too thick and too dense, it starts to rain. Well, a bunch of other stuff is just like in your boiler. If your water is holding too much stuff, things start to fall out and you get scale, you get corrosion, and also then you get a bunch of storms inside your boiler, which is foaming. You know, it's you think of something that you can do there. For schools especially. So this was like my wheelhouse. One company I used to work for, like I set up the entire CPS Chicago Public Schools portfolio. It's 600 schools. They were all different water companies, water treatment. And I had to come up with something where it's like, all right, what's going to be easy for stationary engineers who maybe will be able to like get to their school, because at when I started, every chief engineer did not have assistants. They also had two schools each. So it's like there's no daily blowdowns. Like forget per shift checking. We'd be happy if like, there were some schools that we took over that were like, um yeah, so there's like this sort of like path going to the boiler, if you've ever seen this, of like stuff. And like the path of the stuff was like, oh yeah, the principal used to walk in and turn on the boiler every day. Because that's just what we always did, because we didn't have a stationary for this long, and they just come and flick on the boiler. That's why there's a path going straight to the power panel.
Yeah. Yeah. So, as far as schools, there's pretty, not that, you know, once again, people are not dumb, but they're not well trained. And a lot of schools I've seen, custodians, they kind of get wrapped into this all in one magic. And I feel like that was true, more true when the older schools, the older custodians, but now, those custodians probably had a little bit more experience, but now the custodian job has evolved into this more of a, building cleaner, but it's more of a job that's away from the mechanical systems. And yet that, the school system expects the custodian to come in at, 5:30 in the morning, take care of the steam boiler, blow that down, do all the, daily maintenance, clean the school, deal with the kids, and then,
No
then
removal.
yeah, you'll snow removal and all that. And the boiler ends up being the one that suffers because, once again, if the custodian comes in and they have to remove a ton of snow and they don't blow the boiler down that day, nobody, the boiler doesn't shut down and say, hey, I wasn't blown down. But then they get this cycle of, well, what does this blowdown actually do? If I don't do it and nothing changes, but if I do it, I don't see really any change. So like, why does it really matter? So like, how I guess how do you
Yeah. So
emphasize how do you emphasize the importance of blowdown water treatment to people who have no stakes in the game?
the one thing we have going for us really well, so we've got a couple things. At least this is true of Chicago. We have a very strong educated workforce, and a lot of it in the schools, they're not custodians, they're operating engineers. So it's different people. So at least we have someone who's a true stationary engineer who's working on a boiler. So we have that working for us. The other thing is a lot of these steam boilers, man, these are your perfect old systems. And you've talked about Kiwanis, you've talked about some of these classic old boilers. Essentially, when it was built, it was kind of like just like a slightly larger residential system. And when we look at the problems that are caused in our boilers, well, scale's going to cause by hard water. Corrosion's going to be caused by dissolved oxygen. And if you look at like if we had a residential steam boiler, why don't we have like a water treater go in there? Well, I mean, there's the system is so tight, we don't have leaks. Once the water goes in for the season, it's in. Like there's often not even like a automatic fill on it. So sometimes it's just like this manual and there's like a little Sharpie line, on the feed water tank and it's like, yeah, oh yeah, if that gets below the Sharpie line right there, then I put it on. But I only have to do that once a season. So it's like, okay, you're always returning hot water, so you don't have dissolved oxygen, and that hardness that's in there. Well, that was only at the fill up of the season. That's it. You don't fill anymore. So like maybe there's that like very little scale, but you're not losing any water, so it's all okay. Some of the buildings are very close to that were built in the 20s and 30s. Um, the ones that have leaks, and of course, the ones that weren't maintained, or the radiator life is not, what it used to be. Those are the ones where we're having more issues with. And so, for those types of ones, typically what we say is, look, let's start with basics, have a chemical control, and that chemistry we usually are able to get away with like all in one for something like a school. And that's going to be something that's looking at, all right, we've got one package that is going to at least prevent most of the scale, prevent most of the corrosion. um, and then if your water is clear, like when you're blowing down twice a week, once a week even, you're usually pretty good. And for the most part, I would say this gets into the sort of like, rule of thumb. Most places we were able to pretty much prevent all problems from. And some of the ones though that did have problems is just sort of like using your eyes and ears. So probably one of the worst problems, and this is where like when you started this off by talking about a boiler just filled with scale. um the chief engineer there was just like, yeah, we ran through chemical like insanely fast. Is one of those, we set it the chemical up to a water meter, and so then like certain amount of water comes in from the city, feeds chemistry. Is like we blew through that like 15 gallons like in a week, and then the next one we blew through the next week. So what's going on here? Like, man, that's weird. So we just spent time in the boiler room, and I start noticing like, man, it seems like your feed water tank like is just nonstop going. Is that normal? And I go up to it and realize it's ice cold. So the McDonnell Miller valve had stuck open in the feed water tank and was just nonstop going over the overflow in the feed water tank. So you're not returning any condensate. You have totally hard water going in the boiler, hard and cold water going into the boiler. So you have thermal shock. And then yeah, it's like you're gonna have every single problem you can imagine if we don't get this fixed right away. So actually, the engineer was awesome. He like just basically was able to crack it open and fix it right there. But the thing was, in that particular school, the overflows went straight into a sump pit drain, and then we're like you couldn't see them because it was like 10 feet, like into it. So like you couldn't actually hear the water running. But that was giving me the idea, like just use all your senses. You know, is your feed water tank hot? Do you see steam shooting out of it? Things like that. Oh,
And that's going that water meter. That's a big one as well. A lot of systems, especially in like campuses, are it's, hey, we use 10,000 gallons a week of water, and when that's normal, we need a water meter to detect normal, and we need a water meter to detect abnormal. So if we use 10,000 a week for 5 years and all of a sudden we blow through 30,000 in a week, that should set off the alarm bells. But a lot of buildings and systems, they have meters, but they're not hooked up to a central BMS system, or there's no alarm system. So somebody has to come in and actually look at the meter and write down the numbers and do some subtraction. And it's a very person involved process where I would highly recommend getting meters always attached to a BMS system and have a computer oversight. And that's a huge one. I helped a friend with a hospital that had DA issues, and they were convinced they needed this fancy. Some contractor quoted them like 80 grand to do all this fancy bypass stuff with this DA and surge tank, because they were convinced that they were like, why do we have a steel DA tank? It should be stainless, and because we're corroding it. And the DA wasn't super old, and they were just corroding their piping and DA like crazy, and they couldn't keep feed water piping. They would just leak all the time. And some contractor quoted them crazy amount of money. And I was like, well, how much water are you using? So he asked them, they're like, oh, we have no idea. This healthcare system, they're like, we have no idea how much water we're using. And they put on a water meter, and it ends up being like this crazy amount of water. And it's like, all right, well, how much chemical are you using? And they're using like 1/10 of the amount of chemical that they actually need for the amount of water that they're going through. And it's like, all right, well, that's our problem. Like, we don't need all this like crazy, additions. Like, you're not the only person in the country with a DA tank that is rotting. Like, there's an easier fix than spending 80 grand or whatever on, these like crazy additions and modifications that are custom exactly for your system. We need to track how much water we have, and we need to track how much chemical we're using, and we need to check that daily. And that they would not believe that. They were like, no, that's not our problem. No, it can't just be chemical. And it's like, well, oxygen corrosion.
Embarrassingly,
Yeah.
embarrassingly, like, did they check to make sure that thermometer was working? Because how many times do I go in a DA and it is stuck at 220, like 223, and I'm like, that coming out, like, I can touch it coming out. Like, my handheld, like, little thermometer probe is saying like 120. I know it's coming through a line, but are we sure that thermometer is actually accurate there?
Yeah, that's a big one. Making sure that the data you are getting is correct. I've seen water meters. They'll backflow them with hot water. It'll melt the internals, and the meter might still spin or do something, or it will stop. And they're like, "Oh, we haven't used water in a week." I'm like, "You're telling me we haven't used 1 gallon of water this week or in the past month?" They're like, "No, the numbers haven't changed." Like, why? It's like, wait, hold on. This doesn't make sense. We've used at least 1 gallon of water. How much blowdown have we been doing? We use water during blowdown. Even if we turned 100% of the condensate, you have other water losses. So, it's that gut check of is this source correct, and what other things can I do to verify it? And I know they do that with pumps. I don't know if it's intentionally, but if you have a pump, uh, you'll want to read the suction pressure and the discharge pressure, and they'll pipe the lines so that you'll have different valves, but it reads on the same gauges. And I don't know if that's intentional to just have one gauge, or if the gauge is slightly off, you have that same error consistently with the suction versus the discharge. Whereas if you had two different gauges, the suction pressure gauge could be wrong and the discharge could be correct, and you could be troubleshooting a problem that's not actually a problem. So Off the top of my mind, I don't know if that's intentional to use one gauge, but I know that is a benefit of it. Is if that gauge is 4 psi off, it'll be 4 psi off on the suction and the discharge, so it kind of negates itself. But
Sorry, my brain's also just thinking of how many of those gauges you walk into and they're both valves shut. It's like, well, you're like, oh yeah, this started leaking, so we just valve this shut. Oh, okay.
well, that goes into another thing. A while ago, I was involved or saw a brand new amazing boiler system get put together, and they put a meter on everything. Everything got a meter. If there was a pipe, it had a meter. I'm like, all right, what are we doing with all these numbers? And they're like, oh, we don't know. And they all got piped back to the BMS system and to the control room. I'm like, all right, like that's great that we have all this data, but like, what are we doing with it? And the operating engineers didn't know. They were like, we don't know. Like, we're just looking for alarms. And, you know, it ends up being we are great at collecting data, but we don't know what to do with it. And that's a great use case. I talked about it with Craig in the AI episode of AI oversights for these buildings. And it's like a frosting layer on top of the BMS system. And it will look at the data, and an AI system can say, hey, like our gas flow versus our water usage versus our steam output, like it's changing. Something's wrong. This is what I recommend, that is the changes are to go look, and that will catch something faster than a human who is having to check stuff. But you have to check it consistently. If you have any breakup in the data, now you don't have consistent data, or a human, you have to train them on how to relate gas flow versus water usage versus steam output. And those three things, it's like, well, if we can just do a formula, this is a physics formula and it should be very consistent. And if it's not consistent, there's a hole in the system and we need to find that hole. And, that's a benefit use of the AI. We'll probably see that come out. I'm sure there's tons of use cases for water treatment on that aspect. But going back to the Chicago school system, what's Chicago doing as far as like new building versus old building? Are a lot of the schools old legacy steam systems, and in the new buildings, I assume they're using probably like air handlers and chilled water with hot water systems, hydronic boilers?
Yep. So you hit the nail on the head. The old buildings, they didn't have air conditioning, obviously. Kids were out in the summer and the school year was shorter. So, they didn't have AC at all. There also was less summer school. So now we've got summer school, we've got longer school years. And so, like, for those old schools, you'll still have a steam boiler there. Some Kiwanis still there. A lot of CB 200s, so Cleaverbrook's 200s. Um, a lot of other just kind of like random like types of steam boilers that you'll be like, oh, I didn't know they made a steam boiler in Waukegan, Illinois, sort of thing. Like, and some of them they're still like encased in brick. So all they did was like slap new burners on it, and they're actually pretty efficient. And those are the buildings I always think have the least amount of problems. Then there's the newer buildings and like the kind of I guess the buildings that were like 80s, 90s, those were definitely built with like hydronic hot water boilers. At least in my world, I always call them hot water boilers. And those are the hydronic ones. And they may have chillers there as well. So it might be, like two separate systems with air handlers going through. Um, Sometimes they're shared with like just one common piping going around. Um, but those are definitely the newer ones, and the newer one, like the newest ones, would be multiple pipes where, yeah, you can technically have heating and cooling in each one. Um, but there's all sorts of hybrids too. So some of the hybrids are like you have a steam boiler, and I like it. I really like these ones a lot. A steam boiler that has the heat exchanger to like recirculating hot water loop that's like right inside the boiler room. And so it's like that boiler then is on water treatment is ultra efficient. It like goes out to its load where you can literally like walk to the load where the heat exchanger is, and all your condensate comes back in that very room. Insanely efficient. It's almost a closed loop at that point. And so like those are the ones where it's like if your water is not crystal clear, and I've like pictures where I'll put like domestic water with boiler water right next to it. And it's like, yeah, you can't tell which one's domestic water, which one's boiler water. It's that easy to treat and that much fun. Um, but you also have ones where they decided to take like whatever steam boiler was on site and then modify it to a hot water boiler, and sometimes they did a really good job. Sometimes they left like all the pressure relief valves on it. So at a low pressure, 15 psi, that's really hard for a hydronic boiler to run. And so like you'll go in and you'll be like, why is there water all over the boiler room? It's like, oh yeah, whenever we need to run these a little bit like as hard as we can because it's like -10 out, we exceed 15 psi. So yeah. um all the and it's not steam coming out, it's actual water because they left all the pressure relief valves on at 15 psi, which I don't know what yours usually run at. Like, I mean, a lot of our buildings will be at a minimum 30 at their top floor. So
Yeah, there's a calculation for height, but if people are not familiar, water doesn't push itself up. A lot of people, a very common misconception is people equate water flow the same with gas flow. So a gas will expand to its container, and you know you don't need a steam pump, you don't need a natural gas pump to pump gases through a pipe. And so gas doesn't care if it's going up, down, right, or left versus gravity. Whereas water, it does care, and you need pressure. And the whole 12 to 15 psi thing came out from houses and being an average of 2 stories. But when you get into commercial buildings, you need to look at the whole height of the system versus the boiler. And most often the boiler is on the first floor or in the basement. And you need to take that whole height of the system and then add enough pressure behind it. And that's what your fill pressure is. Because you take city water, which like 80 to 100 psi, and you reduce that down to your system pressure, and that fill pressure is the height of your system, enough pressure to push the water up to the top of your system plus like 5 psi factor. And when you have super low safety valves, and if you 15 psi is just enough for 2 floors, but if you had 3 floors or the boilers are in a basement, you end up, or if you don't have enough expansion in your expansion tank, and you're going to 180 to 190 degrees because water expands as it's heated, you will pop your safety valves, or technically they are relief valves. You'll pop your relief valves and you will have water flowing out of them. And that's a great example of something that's not safe and not normal becoming normal, because it's not really the person's fault. They, no, even if they were to say like, hey, this is wrong, nobody cares, but that happens. That's often a indicator of a lot of industrial accidents, is if you look back and, look back even a year prior and like, hey, like somebody wrote this up in a log and we didn't do anything with it, and an unsafe situation became normal. And, that's a common thing. Oh, our steam boiler safety valve is leaking. And, oh yeah, it just does that. Well, it leaks enough that it corrodes the seat, and the seat doesn't open when it actually needs to open. And, whatever happens, and then they go back and, oh yeah, it was from the safety valve leaking, and the seat didn't open. So that's a super common issue. Same thing with water treatment that happens is, and I would like to hear your take on this, but I've seen people, they, they're testing for soft water, and they will have one or two hardness or a little bit of hardness, and they're like, it's fine. It's fine. That's, whatever. And the numbers start skewing, and what normal becomes is actually not normal, because they don't want to deal with it, or they will lie on the sheets. And I've seen it like, oh yeah, like we've had soft water the past 3 months, but they know if they write a 0 on the hardness in that little box, that's normal, and they can move on with their day. But if they write something else, now they have to notify somebody, they have to look at something, they have to call a contractor, whatever. And it's easier to write 0 than it is to do whatever. And so then they end up writing zeros, and the data lies, and it doesn't actually tell the story. Like, do you see that often, or do you see people, they're like, oh, like this is normal, and you're like, this is absolutely not normal, we should not be doing this.
You know, it's so funny because there's like, yeah, you've got a couple different people. Like you've got the ones who are never going to test, or the clients that are like they are way too busy. It's not. I'm not trying to say oh they're lazy. No, it's they're given too much. The classic name of school. One engineer put it to me this way. It's kind of like being an engineer in a regular like commercial real estate building, but you have 200 um minions who are running around and breaking your stuff on purpose. Like, imagine like, if you've ever like worked in a bar and ever at 2 a.m. every night, someone rips the TV off the wall sort of thing. A sink collapses because someone's doing something in the bathroom they're not supposed to. It's like that, but every day and every second is 2 a.m. So, you know, there's the people who can't do anything and there's absolutely no record keeping. The next level, yeah, would be the people who are doing some record keeping, but then they're pencil whipping, or they're like, I don't actually know what to do when there's a problem. I don't know who call. My boss didn't, tell me what happens here, or even if this is critical or non-critical. In the case of like a school boiler that's like kind of our smaller school, and there's actually like this kind of school, it's called a gerbil school in Chicago. There's roughly, if I were to just guess how many, maybe between 60 and 100 schools, but I mean, I could be off. It could be more like 150. There's like 600 schools in Chicago's network. And these gerbil schools are called that because you can go from the steam boiler room that's detached from the building. It's like actually detached from the school. So then, just kind of a safety thing. And it's like buried in this boiler room that was originally a boiler that was 2 stories tall. So this building, it's brick. You walk in and like it's just this wildly huge warehouse sort of thing that um is 1 story or 2 stories tall and then goes down into kind of like a recessed basement. And that's where the boilers are. And from that room, though, you can walk every single spot into the school because there's tunnels under them. And it was done not only for kind of like ease, because you're like, oh, we're building our steam tunnels. It was done because of having a bomb shelter and having a fallout shelter. So basically, that thought process was if the United States gets attacked, oh, just run down. Kids can all run down into the steam tunnels.
Yeah.
So just awesome little history nuggets there. But so um, in those places, a lot of those type of schools, like they either don't have a softener, or if they do, like if there's a couple parts of hardness going through, I would give it it's no big deal. We start having a problem like if the softener is going above like 4 ppm or 10 ppm, our hardness comes in at 140 ppm in grains per gallon. For the softener guys out there, for whatever reason, I love you guys, but you got to stop using imperial. Okay, it's time to move to metric. I want to say that 7 to 8 grains is Lake Michigan water, and or all Great Lakes water. It's all kind of the same bucket we're pulling from. But and that's why it's important for the water treater to be like, okay, here's a log. If it goes above this, then you've got here's your troubleshooting spots. And my three troubleshooting on a softener before you call me. Just do one of three things, or do all three of these things. One, is it plugged in? The old ones are awesome because there was no electricity to them. It was all valves and stuff, and I love those. But now they have to be plugged in because we need a microchip to everything. The next one is the bypass open. So, you've got gremlins in every single facility, and sometimes a gremlin will open up one of those valves. And then third, is there salt inside the actual brine tank? And if all those three things, are okay, okay, now let's call up and figure things out and get, it could be a valve issue, it could be a regeneration issue, it could be an age issue, it could be, a piece of salt in the equator, but tube there, but it's there's just so much more we need to do from there. But for the most part, it's like, okay, get those three things done. If it goes above this regularly, and especially if they do have a conductivity meter there and they're taking their hardness, also take that conductivity sample, because that will tell me, oh, are you pulling brine into your boiler system, which could create problems.
Another thing on top of that, make sure your power outlet has a power 100% of the time. I have seen a water softener attached to a power outlet on a timer, and it was supposed to be the outlet for like chemical pumps, and
Yeah.
it would randomly turn on and off. But it was an older softener without a display, and I'm like, man, like this, like we're not using salt. Like what's going on here? Like it just doesn't seem to like move and stuff. And then I like looked at the outlets and I'm like, wait a minute, it's not plugged into the right outlet. So I moved it over and like labeled it and stuff. But I've seen more than one case of where the softener is plugged into an outlet that doesn't have 100% power, and that is not the case. We need 100% power, and we don't want to. A lot of people think like, oh, we're going to turn off the water softener because it's like we're not. Where your worry would probably just be the a water leak. If I've seen schools, they'll do walkthroughs on like Christmas vacation to make sure that they don't have water leaks. I've never had a water softener go up in flames because it was plugged in over the weekend or something like that. But
Well, and worst comes to worst, hopefully your water softener is like not far from the drain that it needs to, regenerate. So it's like if it is leaking, well, hopefully it's pitched and, going to the drain there. But you also brought up a good point there with water treatment theory, because like the very first kind of treatment would be like just someone is manually adding chemistry in, like literally like walking up to the top of the feed water tank and like pouring it in. And that used to be a lot more common. The next one, and you mentioned this, was an activated feed water pump. So when the theory is, oh, as the feed water pump activates, your chemical pump activates. And that was like industry standard, I would say, up until like the 90s and kind of 2000 aughts. And then we got to what we talked about earlier, which is submetering. So we have a water meter, water passes through, goes to a controller. We're now able to kind of like trend, okay, how much water are we using in this for year to year? And not for the water usage, it's really for gas usage, and seeing if we're being efficient with that, because that's far more expensive than our water. Um, and then like this kind of next level that keeps getting teased is, do we have a chemistry that would be online that we could like basically have a blowdown that would sample every like, I don't know, 2 3 hours, and then it will kind of indicate if we've got enough of our different chemistries in there. And that one keeps getting teased. A couple companies claim to have figured it out, and whenever I'm in there, it's like, man, this is a lot more marketing than it is actual substance. Like, I'll kind of look at what they're claiming to do, and I'm like, yeah, no, it's really not working that well. And at the end of the day, we've got really hot boilers that tend to break stuff down and molecules down, as well as different, um, a lot of different dirtier processes in boilers. So maybe I don't know. I say that, but maybe in like 5 years, I'll kind of have my foot in my mouth and be like, "Oh man, you got to try this new whatever chemistry. It's completely changed our industry."
How do you feel of solid powdered chemical with the easy add buckets that go on the wall, and then I believe it adds water versus
hmm
premixed liquid chemical?
Um, Whatever the customer is happy with, I am a thrilled water treater. I will make any system work. And the biggest thing is having chemicals delivered. Like, so the problem is, all right, you're shipping them. So you've got to have like basically, if you're doing anything over 5 gallons, you need like your hazmat truck to be shipping it. So it costs more money for that. And then but once it's there, it's like, okay, you've got a certain amount. You've got operators who may need to move around drums, which I don't like operators doing because we've already talked about how busy they are. Are they always going to put PPE on? I hope so. Are they always going to? Yeah, you're shaking your head. So, you know, so that's the one thing about those solids that like is kind of nice is, oh, if they're following the instructions, then there's really less hazard of them getting hurt. The issue I have with those solids is you're introducing a lot more moving parts. You still have the same chemical pumps with those solids, so that stays the same. And then you've got that device that's on the wall that's got a float inside there and a sprayer that goes up. And that's how it creates like basically the chemical on site. So you're just kind of adding another complexity to a system that can go wrong. And I've seen like the first, second generation of those, that little float would get stuck all the time and then it would flood the boiler room. So like you walk into some of those with them and you'll see like they'll have PVC going to the drain just in case like over the weekend when they're gone, that float sticks. And then you also need to actually physically pipe, water going to those, and they need to be at least minimum 40 psi. Could be wrong on that psi. Someone from AP Tech, that's the company that manufactures most of it, will call me up all angry. Yeah, Brian, you knew better. It's only 20 psi we need. And that's typically when I talk to my customers, that would be the biggest reason. As mechanical rooms get more and more built with the end user or like the end maintenance not in mind whatsoever, I think we're going to see those more because like sometimes you don't have space for drums. There's some mechanical rooms where like legit I walk up a ladder and I'd much rather walk up a ladder with like that 1 pound like mayonnaise jar thing than a 50 pound 5 gallon pail. So, and there are combinations too where you can do like an ultra concentrated liquid, but yeah.
Yeah,
So I'm ambivalent.
I've seen the powder. And I think I don't know a ton about them. I've seen them in boiler rooms, but the number one selling point is you don't have to handle liquid chemicals and all this. But going to that boiler room thing, I think a lot of with the whole age of digital everything, a lot of these buildings or building owners believe that they can get a boiler room, and this is a steam boiler room, that they can get a
Mhm.
steam boiler system that is completely automated 100%. And, this is beyond even schools. These are like manufacturing facilities or campus wide, district heating plants. And they think, well, if we just put controls on everything, then we can have an automatic boiler room. And now we don't need people to sit in the boiler room or check on the boiler room. And that is something that is not true. Because yes, you can automate stuff, but at a certain point in time, um, and I don't know what the regulations are on blowdown, but I know in my experience that blowdown is still manual. There's a reason why, and I don't know what ASME says about it off the top of my head, but I have seen one case of automatic blowdown valves on a boiler, and the inspector was like, "Oh, I don't know, it's fine." But all blowdown valves on high pressure boilers are, you got two of them, but they're manual, and then you have the surface blow down, which is automatic, but even then, surface blow downs are kind of temperamental. But, you need to have somebody to come in and check that everything's working. And a lot of operators or owners think, well, I just spent $10 million on my automatic boiler plant. Like, why am I paying somebody to come in monthly or weekly to come check on it? That's, why can't we automate this? And that's, unfortunately, the part of Steam is it's not a automation system where you just set and forget, and you know it, a lot of it's way less manual than it was or could be, but it's not a set and forget. Unlike, I don't know tons about chillers, but even hot water boilers, hot water boilers, hot water systems, as long as you don't have a leak, and you can pretty much set and forget it and then just do the maintenance on the boiler at the recommended times, and which is super amazing, super great. But then you introduce the Steam system and they're a little bit more manual. But going back to the surface blowdown, how do you feel about surface blowdown, and beyond like school
Yeah.
systems, any surface blowdown system for especially high pressure boilers? How do you feel about them?
Um, if you don't have like a person there per shift recalibrating that probe, you're pretty much just setting up a timer at that point, which is which is like how often it samples, and that's how often it's blowing down. Because they are so temperamental, they get off track so much. And I've tried every single company, like, and it's kind of like a pH probe. You mentioned expansion tank before. Like those things will work. Like usually, they'll either show their inaccuracies within like 3 months, or they'll last and they'll be like that one magical one that you're like, yeah, this one I never need to recalibrate. It's amazing. Um, but and with us, that's our handheld pH probes that are like multimeters are around $1,000, $2,000. The pH probes that are $10,000, those ones are super accurate. But now you're getting into that like you're those logarithmic differences of quality. And that's no longer a field test device because it can't, there's too many fine little electronics in to actually like, you know, do things right. So it needs to be in a laboratory that's clean, it's regularly maintained by a professional, and it stays on a desk. Once you throw it in my, my backpack, no, it's completely messed up. So I'm not a big fan of those, and especially I think like in commercial real estate, water treaters are notorious for selling those as a quote unquote upsell. Hey, it's going to make your system more automatic. And really, you just made that system actually less efficient because they're already going down and doing the bottom blowdown per day. And now you're sampling, let's say, every 8 hours to see if it needs to blow down more. Well, now I'll notice on the water treatment reports, or if they leave it on during the summer, all of a sudden you're at half the concentration in your water that you can handle. So you're actually blowing down more chemical, more water, and you paid with natural gas to heat that water up. So it's not my favorite thing, but it's absolutely needed in high pressure boilers, factories where they're testing once per shift. So that's where I see the service blowdown. As far as Chicago goes, we cannot put anything automated on the bottom blowdown is 100% illegal. So, and I like that because that means like, no, you still need someone, no matter if it's low pressure, high pressure, to be, have eyes on that boiler.
I think the number one, and I'll have to make a note to look it up for what ASME says, but I think the number one issue with automatic bottom blowdown valves on a boiler is if they hang open, now you just dumped the boiler, which can be pretty dangerous. Obviously, hopefully the low water cutoffs will go down, but on a pretty big boiler, if you're dumping that much hot water, you're going to overload the drain system, the blowdown separator, and everything. But maybe it's something that it's just like a legacy thing. Like I wouldn't say that there's no safe way to have automatic blowdown, but I don't think it's standard, and I haven't seen it as standard, and I don't know if it should be. Like if we allow convenience to overtake safety, what's the purpose of having automatic bottom blowdown? Convenience, but then you would also argue that automatic bottom blowdown doesn't miss a shift and it blows down. But I could also, I've thought about why don't we have automatic bottom blowdown that's manually operated? So now you're taken away from an operator getting burned. So you can encase the piping in safety shielding or whatever, and you have to
Hmm.
go up and you have to hold the button and you have to witness it, and then maybe you get a temp probe that logs the blowdown.
Yeah.
But there's so many operators who will open up the valve and the piping will blow apart or something, they'll get burned. There's all this stuff. You're supposed to wear a face shield and gloves. A lot of people don't. But why can't we just have you know basically a dead man switch? But hey, it needs to be a manual process, but we're limiting the human element of getting burned, and you're there to visually see that the valves open, that it blows down, and that the valves close. And if not, you close these manual valves or something. Just something I've thought about. I don't think, ASME is a very slow moving process or even any jurisdiction. So, but, I would actually argue that automatic valves with a manual operator that has to push it and visually see that is actually safer than opening both of the valves manually. And if you've opened a boiler with 150 psi, it clicks when it goes between. You open up the first valve, the quick valve, the knife valve, and it clicks because the pressure fills that,
Yeah.
and then you're supposed to throttle it with the second valve. But sometimes, you open that up and you can throttle it right into a 90 and that it goes bang. And blowdown piping isn't always the best maintained, especially after the two valves. And you can easily rip off some threads, because, it constantly is heated and then filled with water and then it drains. So it's very active corrosion. Yeah, but going back to this surface blowdown, um, I I kind of agree with you. I do agree. But my biggest thing is, so I'm a big manuals guy. I don't know how you feel about manuals, but I love manuals. So I see brand new boilers rolling off the factory floor with surface blowdowns.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, I know for sure that surface blowdown is not installed per the manual on brand new boilers. And I have yet to see that I can recall. I see more boilers, brand new boilers, roll off the factory floor with surface blowdowns that are incorrect, not even like close. They are incorrect with how they are installed. And I open up the book and it says recommendation. And I couldn't, I don't have the right contacts at Walcom or Advantage or anybody to like, they say, hey, you need to have 2 feet of piping here. You need to have the probe here and whatever. Like how much deviance can deviate from this? Cause I know a Chicagoland boiler manufacturer who does it 100% wrong versus the manual. Not that saying it can't work. Obviously, the manual says for best operation, but we all know that on a high pressure steam boiler, they're pretty temperamental. So why don't we give it a fighting chance and do it for the best operation? Well, that takes up more real estate. But I'm like, well, if we have manufacturers rolling off brand new boilers and is not installed even remotely correctly how the manufacturer recommends, like, are we just making up magic then? Like, why are we installing surface blowdowns and we're not even giving them a fighting chance? And I've always wondered that because I've repiped surface blowdowns exactly how the manufacturer says, and I see a difference in how it operates.
The biggest thing with those is making sure that you're actually getting a sample from your probe. Your probe cannot take a sample of steam. It needs to take a sample of water and is also temperature calibrated. And that's why you have that, like, several feet. So then it's got enough line, it can actually condense in there, and then grab its sample. And man, that's a good point. Because yeah, I notice that all the time where I'm like, yeah, this one's not really working too well, and it becomes, yeah, a glorified timer where, yeah, I'll have it blow down every 8 hours and kinda throttle that valve back.
Yeah. Or I'll see, and I know Wallchem, and I'm sure Advantage, all of them are very. Wallchem says, hey, you need to use a cross or a T that is this size, and you need to use a bushing that is this size. And I've seen it where people will put the probe in a cross or a bushing, or they'll bush down twice, and now the water is completely missing. Like the probe isn't in the water, it's now in a branch. And they're like, why does this not work? And I'm like, why are we not following the manual? Like the manual says exactly what we need to do, and we need to follow the manual 100% sure. And I don't see people doing that. That's like my number one thing that I see installed incorrectly. But then I'm saying, well, if everybody is installing it incorrectly, why is it set? Like, why? Who from Wallchem says, hey, we need 2 foot of piping here? Like, what are the variances? Where's your test lab that you said this needs to be done this way? Because, they'll say, obviously, this for best operation, it needs to be this. All right, well, in your test lab, did you put an automatic valve, your probe, and your metering device all within, with short nipples and, C versus having one that's 10 feet? And like, what's the difference? And, I don't have enough money yet to do that variance testing, but that's on my to-do list of
Yes.
variance. But I
Yeah.
want to see, like, if we put the probe at different intervals and change the steam pressure versus the metering device and the automatic, like what actually changes. And these manufacturers should be running that, but I don't think maybe these manufacturers don't care that much about it. But I'm like, I want to see lab tests of like, hey, this is how we got the 2 feet, or did they just write 2 feet just because they're like, it's 2 feet, whatever. But if somebody's listening
Yeah,
to this
as
or
you
somebody that
guess.
knows, reach out to me, because I want to. This is something that just drives me wild, especially when I see manufacturers installing them and they're like coming right out of the shell, probe, automatic valve, metering device, and they don't put the right size T, but they don't put the linear feet, the foot before, the 2 feet after, all this stuff. I'm like, what are we doing? And then I've had customers previously that go, hey, like these automatic things, like I compare the numbers to my manual tests and like they're like never the same. And then I try to recalibrate it and like it seems to not calibrate, and it just seems to be like all over the place. And I'm like, well, they're kind of temperamental and it's like very situational. And yeah, I don't know, like it's something I've always wondered and I can't get a straight answer on. Obviously, Wallchem isn't gonna come out and say like, oh, like if it's this, they want to sell product, but they I think it should be, obviously it's not this hard and fast rule, but it needs to be at this certain point, if we don't have this much, it degrades the measuring of the probe by 50%. And that's why we put this much. Or Advantage Control says, we did the test and this is exactly what it is. And we found that our measurement degrades past this point. So for the best operation, we recommend the probe, and that's why we did this setup. And that's maybe that's too much data, but I'm like, why can't we have that amount of data? And I want to know the why behind it. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that is our controls industry is like, so as like, our cell phones have gotten like really cool and do all sorts of stuff. People do all this really cool stuff with the Raspberry Pis. Like everyone, like my fridge, I don't have ads on my fridge, but I don't have a TV on my fridge, but it's gone like all these smart features where I can log into it and it tells me how many times I open and close it. um, I'm still using the same controllers that were not really different than 15 years ago. So, like, these sorts of really granular things, I wish would come to our industry, but it all comes back to we're in preventive maintenance. We just talked this whole time about how these different companies are looking at like, well, how can I automate everything? But they also want to pay as little as they can. Like the reason for not automating it is not this like desire to say, I don't think that people working in boiler rooms is a very safe career choice. And I don't want my child, little Johnny, to grow up working in a boiler room. So I'm going to automate boiler rooms. No, the desire is I want to pay less money. I want a lower line item cost because we want to package this building back up, this factory, and then resell it for a higher profit. And if we can get that line item down for the next quarter, I make a bonus. That is my worldview on everything. And the controller manufacturers are looking at that same thing. And so these sorts of fun experimentations aren't happening enough. Um, we're not pushing the envelope enough on any of this stuff. And the sort of driven by line item expenses instead of stepping back and knowing that no, there's only so many, like if you spend money on more line items, you have less emergency things that come up. If you spend like if you take your car into the shop for its regular oil changes, I bet someone's gonna notice something else that's weird going on. And therefore, and it's not the oil change, it was just that someone had eyes on it and be like, hey, did you know this is leaking? And now you just saved yourself a new radiator. Or I don't know. You can tell I don't work on cars. But that's the world we're in though, where everyone is only looking at line items that are predictable and how to remove them out of budgets.
Yeah.
So
Humans are inefficient and humans don't do what we do. And damn those humans, they cost money. I want to just pay robots and controllers to do everything so that we can eliminate humans. But yeah, that's also a good thing from like a contractor or water treatment standpoint. A lot of in-house facilities you get used to your environment, and you may have people that just don't realize something or just may not know any better. And you walk in as a contractor or water treatment with fresh eyes, and you look at something, you're like, hey, like, and I would have did this all the time when I was a service technician. And I'd walk in, I'm like, hey, like, do you guys know like that, your pipe over here is leaking, or like, hey, that your feed water tank is overflowing? Like, I'm not here for that, but like, do you guys, and sometimes they'd be like, oh yeah, like we got a handle, like, yeah, it is what it is. But other times they'd be like, no, oh, we didn't know that. Like, oh, go show us. But it's just these fresh eyes of you can able to spot stuff. Whereas if you work at a place every day, you become used to it, and you may not know a valve handle is turned or something is wrong or something. And, somebody coming in, same thing with mechanic, they lift up your car and, they know what's normal and they can spot what's not normal very, very quickly. Same thing with a service technician or water treatment walking in a boiler room. looking at the logbooks of water treatment, a good person, look at the logbooks and say like, yep, this is great, from a 10-second glance, or they look at it like, something's not right here. These numbers, our conductivity and everything, like these, I don't think we should have these all together. Something's not right. Either we're fudging numbers or something's going on here. Let's take a deeper dive into that. But if you never investigate anything, that becomes normal, and numbers like that become normal in house. And, and that's the value of somebody outside coming in, double checking or like putting eyes on stuff. But unfortunately, that does cost money. And, but I would say, that's the age old tale of preventative maintenance, especially for like these factories. Every factory wants 100% uptime. And, if we cut preventative maintenance, how much, the bean counters that went to the Ivy Leagues,
Hmm.
how much preventative maintenance can we cut and still make, the widgets? And unfortunately, I've seen the cycle of they cut, especially on the boiler side. Then the person leaves. There's a huge breakdown. A huge check gets written to fix the breakdown. All that savings is gone, but the person left with their bonus because they cut the maintenance budget for 3 years straight. And it's not a long term outlook. I mean, that's probably the number one thing with public companies is the companies are constantly looking at the next quarter, and they don't care about the next 10 years. It's how do we make this quarter? How do we make this quarter? And with a boiler system, you buy a boiler. Let's just say a fire tube boiler, 200 horsepower. Hopefully that boiler lasts 30 years. You might have to change the burner, might have to change the controls, but unless you rot out the steel, like the steel doesn't go bad just because it's old. Like we have boilers from the 40s that are still running. So how do we set up our standard operating procedures and our maintenance so that this whole boiler system runs as efficiently as possible for the next 30 to 40 years? And, how are we going to prevent these major breakdowns, or like, hey, now we got to bring in a rental for 20 grand a month, and like all these emergencies.
20 grand a month. Everyone wants a quote for that low on a rental boiler. 20 grand a month.
Oh,
I've heard
small.
another zero.
Well, yeah, those are bigger boilers. Smaller boilers are 20 grand a month. But it all depends on the availability and everything. But and that's kind of where the I've heard. I don't know much about corporate accounting, but there's a like a maintenance emergency budget, and then there's like capital expenditures.
Hmm.
And even though that they have the money, they're in two different buckets. And I've seen companies spend, you know, the money renting 2 years on a rental, but then you try to sell them a brand new boiler. They're like, oh, well, that's a capital expenditure. We don't have the money for that. I'm like, wait, we just paid rent for 2 years for a rental, and we're fixing up your old boiler during that time. Like, we just paid double the price for a new boiler. Like, what are we doing? And they're like, yeah, well, this is the emergency budget. It doesn't have to get approved. We can just spend the money. Like, I don't understand that much, but it's like, all right, how about we step back and say, wait, why does this not make sense? But I mean, I'm not, I call
There
that,
was one company I worked for, and they they put in a $40 per day per diem when we're traveling, and this is just a couple years ago. And it's like, wait, what? I can't like $40 a day when traveling. Like I'm already traveling for work. Like it already sucks. So at least I can do is like give myself a decent dinner. Um and the one sales manager is just like, well, you know what you do is just order two entrees and then say you took someone out. And then it's like, oh, and then it's you're taking someone out. I'm like, but it can this is the whole thing. Can we make stuff make sense, please?
yeah, I've heard when you have to start making stupid rules, you have the wrong procedures or you've hired the wrong people. That's one of those, when, and it's hard with a company, especially larger companies. Sometimes you just need people. You can't have the best people at all levels of the company. But when you when your ground people say, "Hey, this doesn't make sense, so we're gonna make up, randomness like ordering two entrees and all this stuff," and you know, and they don't blanket that, a good manager would get back to the root cause. But that is corporate America, and yeah, I
Yep.
haven't been exposed to that too much. Kind of stay in my own little world, but yeah, that's yeah, weird stuff. But surface blowdown companies, reach out to me. I want to know. I want to see the lab. I will fly out. I want to see the lab. I want to see the testing. I want to see the numbers, if the numbers exist. And I'm just, that's my number one thing is surface blowdown controllers on boilers. And that's when I get a little bit more money and testing space, I will do my own experiment. But I think that that's the geek in me, finding that interesting. Beyond, a lot of people are like, I find it weird that we have to justify being interested in work, but then people will go home and watch sports from Friday to Sunday, and it's like, wait, you're watching men run around on a field, achieve their dreams that they probably worked for since they were 10, and you're telling me that I'm weird for being obsessed about my industry and my career and wanting to get better and wanting to know all the nuances. Like, who's actually weird here? And it just goes back to what's socially acceptable. Sports have become cool in America, especially in the last 20 years. The NFL, 50 years ago, nobody cared about the NFL. Like, the guys playing in the NFL had day jobs, and it was kind of this thing, but now, like, there's so much money in sports, but it's normal, it's part of culture. The whole gambling in sports, that's part of culture. But being obsessed about your job, about boilers and water treatment, oh, you're weird, don't take that so seriously. What do you do for fun? What are your hobbies? All this stuff. It's like, why can't I be obsessed about it? Why do I have to justify my obsession or coolness of, like, I find it interesting.
I'm totally with you here because, like, but the thing is, though, I do find people are always interested in this stuff because, like, most people don't know stuff is manufactured in the United States. Like, the average person I talk to, like, and I live in the city, like, so you can see the background there. That's a lovely picture of the skyline of Chicago. I am roughly like, if you were to pan that camera due west, like, I am about a mile from there. So, like, I am in the city. Most people do not work in factories who are my friends. Most people are some sort of consultancy, computery, AI sort of person. And so when I say, I'm like, oh yeah, well, yeah, I go in the mechanical rooms and, like, I see boilers, like, oh, where do we still have those? Um, I, like, start pointing out cooling towers on top of roofs. I'm like, oh yeah, you see that steam coming up? That's actually, like, so if you see steam, that's either trying to get rid of heat or it's part of making heat. So, like, it's those 2 things you're gonna see there, and people are kind of interested because 'cause they're like, "Wait a minute, you actually, like, do something." Like, you're not consulting and talking about what other people do, or, like, you're not, like, just in a computer space of, like, getting people spreadsheet gains in the banking industry. Like, you're actually, like, going there, doing something. There was a problem, or there could be a problem, and you're stopping that problem from happening. Oh, and, you fix things by literally turning a valve.
That goes back to the our first conversation, first topic of the very, very fast feedback cycle. Nobody cares about heat till there's no heat, and all of a sudden everybody's like, who are the people responsible for heat? Like, and a lot of people walk into buildings, they don't know why it's hot or why it's cold, and I don't blame them. Like, their only reference is, oh, I have a furnace in my house, and they nobody, like, the average population hasn't seen a fan that's 6 feet in diameter that's supplying air through an air handler for a big commercial building, or boilers and stuff. Yeah, and that's, I've talked about this regularly. Is I tell people, oh, I do boilers. Oh, those little things in old houses. It's like, well, yes,
Yeah, that
but
and
yeah, but that, I don't blame them. That's their only experience. And I always, if everybody wasn't so secretive, I'm like, the coolest part about when I was a service technician, even now when I do training, is when I go to a facility, even especially a manufacturing facility, and you see something super boring. It's like, I always tell people about cardboard. Like, oh, cardboard, like whatever. But then you see these giant paper rolls being all spooled up on this corrugator machine, and then you see like it corrugating over the top, and then it getting pushed down, and then the steam being ejected, glue added, all the paper being glued together, and then the knife cutter is the coolest thing.
yeah.
That
And it's so
cardboard,
fast.
it's
Like it's
going,
doing so many things like insanely fast.
it's like I don't, I think it's like 700 to 800 feet a minute or feet per second or something is a good corrugator speed. Rough on my averages. If you're a corrugator, don't hit me up in the comments.
The angry
But,
corrugators are gonna
but
be commenting.
yeah, hit me up. Invite me. I want to come see your corrugator. But yeah, it'll be going down, and this knife will just thump, and it'll cut it without even no interruption, no nothing, and then it stacks the cardboard and cha 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 cha, and then the cardboard comes out in a giant pile, and then it goes through like a folder machine. They'll send it through the folder, and I saw a brand new folder get put in, and it had, like, you could barely see the boxes on how fast they were getting folded and going through this machine. And there are all these like servos and stuff. And it's just, whoa. And out comes the opposite side is folded boxes. I'm like, this is so cool. Same with, I've been to a factory that makes Humvee doors. I've seen one that makes tank sights for the Abrams tanks. And it's just like very cool stuff, but the average American person doesn't see this stuff, and they don't know these industries exist. They obviously buy stuff, but there's no relation to the supply chain because it's all hidden, especially since the 80s, where a lot of America has gotten out of the manufacturing space. People don't know where their stuff comes from. And even something super simple as like a car tire. Like, what is the entire supply chain of a car tire? Like, how do we get the rubber and all the
Man,
composites, and what goes into making a car, and how many people touch all that supply chain to get a car tire? Nobody thinks about it. They just go to the tire shop and they're like, I want 4 tires. Great. And the tires just magically appear to them, but they don't think about like, oh, like we needed boilers and steam to make the molds. Like I've seen the retreading process of semi tires. They'll use steam for that. They'll use steam heated molds for inner tubes of tires, and these you just inject rubber or whatever, and all of a sudden these inner tubes start popping out of these molds, and these giant presses and everything. And I'm like, this is so cool. And obviously, not everybody's going to think that's cool, but I think people would have a greater. The average person in society has gotten so detached from where stuff comes from, as we've rolled companies up into like conglomerates. Nobody, you used to go down to your local hardware store and you're like, oh, this is Bob's Nails, and that's down the street. And my uncle works at Bob's Nails and they sell Bob's Nails. Now Home Depot, you're like, I don't know where nails come from. You're like, screws, wood, like there's no detachment because stuff is getting shipped, all around the world, but all around the United States. And it used to be so much more localized. And I don't like, that's how it is. Like, there's no, we could talk about the good old days all we want, but that's how it is. But that's another reason why we have a labor issue, because everybody says, oh, it's great industry, yada yada yada, and it's like, well, nobody knows you exist. Nobody knows to apply to an industry that they don't know exists. And people think if I just put an Indeed post out there, people are going to come. It's like, nobody knows you exist. Do you ever drive down an industrial park and you're like, who are all these companies? Like, they actually make money. They're in business. Who are all these companies? And they have, help wanted signs and all this stuff. Nobody knows they exist. So nobody applies, especially good candidates. Oh, we can't get anybody good. Yes, because all the good people don't know you exist. They go work for their friends. They go work for their connections, and that's how it like that's how it is, and that's why you have to be super loud. And we as an industry historically have not been loud because we've always been, oh, we have work, we don't need to advertise. And I'm sure it's the same in the water treatment space where you know who, who knows about water treatment other than maybe a chemist going to college or a you know
Yeah.
chemical engineer or
Um,
something.
I actually did a speech. So, if you want to talk to every single water treatment supplier, Advantage, Walchem, Lakewood, I probably if I give me 10 minutes, I'll have like 10 other ones that have all like closed their doors by now. Eagle Controls is what comes to mind. Osmonics. But so they're all at AWT, the AWT convention, which is Association of Water Technologies. We do have a sort of like inner water treatment group. The big companies really don't come to it. So my like nationwide competitors, they're not going to be there. But all these kind of like smaller companies are going to be there. And so about like 2 years ago, um, I stood up and did a presentation on like why I think people are struggling to hire and keep employees. And one of the things I commented in there is like, hey, I'm in my late 30s now. When I started in this industry in my mid 20s, I was like the youngest one in the room. And looking around at who's coming to my speech right now, like all of you guys are the industry leaders of small business. And I'm still like one of the youngest ones in this room right now. That's kind of a problem, guys. Like, yeah,
That's my number one observation, and I know that's normal for it in the normal chain of corporate cycle. The older people are promoted, they're in leadership, and they're the ones that show up at conferences. But when I go to a conference and I'm within the last 7 to 10 years, and I'm the youngest person or one of the youngest, and then the age gap is 20 years, 30 years. And I'm like, all right, so even if you do have young people work at your company, why don't you bring them to these conferences? Oh, like, well, that doesn't make sense. They're just a salesperson or this or that. It's like, yes, but there's this like there's this opportunity to like just expand your mind to see what's out there, because we can get this four walls of our life and not think of what else is out there. But then you go to a conference and you meet people or you see booths and stuff, you're like, wow, like I didn't know all this existed. And then you talk to a couple people and you're like, wait, all of my problems everybody else has. We all have the same problems. Water treatment's basically the same across the entire country. Boilers and steam systems, people typically have the same problems across the country. Wait, I'm not alone in this. And then and it's like, well, you shouldn't have to wait till you're 45 or 50 to go to your first conference or be in a leadership role. And that's a normal thing in the mechanical contracting, like contracting space. But, go to a tech company. Nobody blinks at Silicon Valley when you got
23.
five 25-year-olds that are running a $100 million company. They're, oh, that's normal. But there's this like, and I know it like costs money, but at a certain point in time, you have to invest in bringing people, and stuff is not always going to make dollars and cents on a piece of paper. And yes, your young superstar may go to the conference and meet somebody and end up getting hired somewhere else. That may happen. But are you going to operate from scarcity or abundance? And if we are going to solve our labor problem, I don't think it's ever going to be solved. I think we're always going to need people. But if you're going to solve your labor problem as a company, you can't solve the industry's problem, but solve it as a company. You have to do stuff that other people aren't doing, and that means doing stuff that doesn't make dollars and cents. So for your like, what as far as like, your speech, like, what were the main topics about that? Do you remember?
Yeah. So I kind of put because I joke that I've had a lot of bad bosses. At the time, I had a really good boss, and so speaking of like getting poached, man, it would have been really tough for me to get poached from this boss because he was that guy that was always like, if you were ever like out, like let's say we went on a call together, he would always make sure you got lunch, and then like he would just be like, oh man, there's a really good liquor store over there. Why don't we stop in there and I want to look at bourbon. Here, why don't you grab one? He would just do these random acts of generosity all the time. He was always checking on everyone. If a customer was like rough, you know, and we all have them, he was never the one to be like, well, go talk to him and let me know what you say. He was always one of, oh yeah, bring me in. Let's go in there together. So he was always supportive. And so yeah, I kind of put it on like 5 levels. And I don't remember them all off the top of my head, but that thing of pay was the last. Like, everything else is kind of like you can put on a scale of like, how is my boss? Is my boss good or bad? How is the company mission? Do I feel like I'm like, this company mission is going in a right way? Do I feel like my job is going in a right way? And my work-life balance, is that good or bad? And depending on where the scale is on all those, like, is where your final wage is. Because, like, if they're all bad, you're going to ask for a lot more money. If they're all good, well, you're kind of gonna be like, I mean, we've all, I don't know if we all, but I know I've been in a job where I'm like, well, money is not, I could make more, but like everything here is going really well. I have good work-life balance. I like the way the company is operating. I like what I'm doing. And my boss is chill, doesn't check up on me on a, Friday afternoon, or will literally like, if I say anything like, oh yeah, I want to go to the dentist and this is the time, you're like, oh, okay, cool, have fun. So that's kind of some of the stuff I look at. And as far as that, like, it gets back to the even like trying to quantify everything. You can't quantify someone's minutes or someone's uptime. Like, you can't quantify a person's outputs. People try to, and it's like you're you're not going to be able to quantify like and we were talking about this earlier about like having another person just walk in. One site I'm working with right now, they basically bought this facility from a company that went under. And one of the first things I'm like, I'm trying to figure out why this boiler is like just not doing the things I want. And then I felt behind the where the blowdown is, it's just a single boiler, no steam header. We talked about having the two valves for the blowdown. No, it's just got the wheel one. And I noticed, I'm like, wait, before I even blew down the boiler to like get a good sample, it was hot back there. Okay, this valve is leaking all the time. And so then some as I keep going around, so that was one problem. Another problem I started noticing, I'm like, wait a minute. Their steam line goes up, goes across the factory to where their the load is. It's a brewery, so it's like where their brew house is. That's completely uninsulated up there. That's like 200 feet of uninsulated pipe that the boiler needs to get to. So like there's just so many things that yeah are outside of that line item that you're gonna see.
Are water treaters typically paid a salary?
Ooh, good question. So there's a couple different models out there. There's that like you are just a technician, and some business owners see water treaters as merely someone that goes around, gets the service report done, and that's your statement of work. So they're usually paid a salary, and then there's a salary commission model where it's like you are responsible for like a territory and a piecemeal sort of thing. So depending how big your territory is, you get commission on top of that. And then there's ones where I've seen where they're just like, oh, you're gonna act like your own little small business, and depending on what your total profit is there, like that's what you get paid. So it leads to lots of different models and sort of helps also understand why certain companies seem to act like they do. Like certain ones, one rep who's telling me, "Oh yeah, I'm on year 3, so anything that's kind of on edge, I'm letting drop because I've got to tank my territory because we get paid off growth." So he had it up to a science where he'd have 2 years of good growth, and then his third year, just let everything drop out, lose a couple of customers, make sure not to follow up with any good new leads, unless they were absolute, beasts, and then he'd have his territory shrunk, and then he'd rebuild.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. But that also goes back to the what are you rewarding? And it seems very simple, but I've seen some stuff of in all industries, not just water treatment, but it's like, all right, you are getting this outcome that you don't want, but what are you rewarding? And going back to the pay thing, for service technicians are in short supply for boilers, and a lot of companies think they can just overpay somebody. And it's like, well, you can attract them by overpaying them, but all you're now getting is a mercenary. And if you don't have culture and work life balance nailed down, and I say work life balance in quotes because I don't believe in that, but there, there
Okay.
is a balance to it. And if you don't have the leadership, have a good boss and have, you know, communication down and all this stuff, that don't be surprised when that mercenary leaves in a year or two for somebody else. And that's kind of where this whole job hopping thing came from. That's a common thing among younger people. Not that it's wrong, but working a job for a year or two and then get a 20% raise, 20% raise, 20% raise as they hop jobs. And yes, theoretically it works, but if that's, you will hit a ceiling and there's all these problems, long-term problems with it. But going back to just the company side, a lot of companies, and I want to think every company wants to do the right thing. A lot of companies, all they care about is selling chemicals. And if that doesn't have the best interests of their end user in mind, then they don't care. They just want to sell chemicals. They want to move product, and that's normal across multiple industries. But I think that's where you can have some differentiation of your business. I think, is it just you and your brother?
Right.
Yeah. So like you being the small man, small, but you are
Whoa,
not
whoa, whoa, what does that mean, hey? What do you mean a small man?
the small man corporate wise. Unless you're doing 100 million in revenue that I don't know about, but that a lot of people see that as a disadvantage, but there are so many advantages to it, especially when you have like an owner operator like you and your brother who are students of the industry, care about the end customer, and like want results. And like, I mean, hype yourself up, talk about it. Like, how do you position yourself versus, the mammoths of the industry who are,
Hmm.
they just hire territory reps, and not to say that they can't care, but as the company gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, it's harder, they have way more overhead and they push sales, sales, sales to keep that engine machine going. And the end user can suffer in that. And that's, as you talked about, 2 years of growth, 1 year tank, 2 years of growth, 1 year tank. How do you position yourself? And, what do you see from your customers as far as taking new ones on, or like, stories you hear of picking up accounts of what other people are doing? Yeah.
Well, the biggest thing is, you see that a lot of companies are just cycling their reps. And this was actually why I just finally started at the last place I worked at. I'm like, I'm just gonna open up my own shop. Forget this, because there'll be someone like me, and I'll become a manager. Well, now maybe I have a handful of accounts, I'm managing some people, and then it was like, oh, and then the next level up, you become the troubleshooter. And all right, well, so now I'm just going around fixing all these problems. And I kept seeing again and again and again, this wasn't the end user's fault. It was like, dude, um, let's say you're working for maybe like Eric, you weren't doing your job. How did you not notice, like we were talking earlier, that softener was hard for the last 3 months? You got a Legionella positive 3 times in your cooling tower. Well, did you open up the cooling tower and take a picture? Wait, you didn't? And then it's like, oh, you didn't have time for that? Well, how many stops are you doing? And a lot of these companies are pushing more and more stops, more and more output. So there was one company, it was on average between 7 to 10 stops, different locations per day. Which I mean, like trying to like there was no time to just sit there and be like, what's going on? Or like, let me do my report and spend another 30 minutes. Like, and I'm not doing anything necessarily that's like high octane thinking. It's more just like doing my report, chill in the boiler room because I'm waiting for that weird thing to like approach myself. That weird noise, that weird click. Um, and I would say most of our clients right now are on referral, just because like they are sick of needing to retrain someone new that's coming in. Um, they're sick of having someone who doesn't know what they're doing coming in. Um, or they're just like, yeah, we had a rep who we liked, and that person got promoted out, and you got no love for this new person coming in. So finally, there's just the type of person who's like, you know what? I know you're going to do all right. I'm willing to take the risk because I just like entrepreneurs. I'm cool with any of those. Oh, also, we're fun to work with. So it doesn't hurt. And being the owner operator thing, like, I just have this opinion that so much money goes to the greed of whatever the business owner is because, like, it's just like they need to own the business 100%. They need to make a higher salary than everyone else. And they need to also just like, pinch other salaries as low as possible. And it's like, you already have all this, net worth and assets. And you want to make, sometimes 10 times as much as the next highest paid employee. Like, and you want to make people doing you're expecting people to do as much work as you are, 60 hours a week when you're not paying them to. Come on now. So
There
yeah,
are
those are all the things.
there are a lot of inefficiencies as a company grows, and overhead is a big thing, and that's why sales get pushed because overhead grows and it becomes uncontrolled. And now one water treatment rep is trying to pay for 10 Debbies in accounting.
Hmm.
Yes, the Debbies are, you know, you have to account, you have to bill people, but now you have $1 million a month in overhead that just to break even that you're trying to break off. And yeah, there's efficiencies in scale, but there's a lot of inefficiencies, and the end user often suffers. And we've seen that in corporate America in all aspects. Companies will start off, they'll have amazing customer service, and they'll be very in touch with their customers and what they're doing. And as they scale, that gets less and less just due to like scale. Like if you have 1,000 customers, it's pretty easy to stay in touch with them. But now you have 1 million customers. I mean, you've seen that with like Netflix. Netflix is, um, you know, they're the streaming service, but now people are, canceling or, oh, these shows aren't that great, and like having all these things, or then they raise prices and they're getting more disconnected from their user base. It's like, all right, what do Americans actually want? And turns out Americans don't want more ads, but that's the, how are we going to pay for this? Well, we'll just sell more advertising. And that's, I have Amazon Prime, and sometimes I'll watch a movie and I get oh, and I know it's only $1 or $2 a month or more, but they're like, oh, we're gonna take
It's
away
bad.
the no ads. You know, we started with the advertising of no ads, but now you have to watch 3 minutes of ads to start. Oh, and by the way, you have to watch ads during your movie or during your TV show. And it's like, all right, you know, like what is this paying for? And it's not like Amazon was like, oh, we're losing money, we're selling advertising, now we're making money. It's like, no, we were only making $100 billion, and now we're selling advertising, and now we can make 300 billion. And I'm like, I'm all for making money, but it's how do we optimize the user experience so that we have advocates and customers who want to do business with us? And I think a lot of people, they don't want to do business with Amazon. They don't like buying from Amazon, but they do it because it's convenient, it's easy. And in the mechanical contracting space, in the water treatment space, in the service industry, a lot of companies will say like, oh, we have customers. It's like, well, have you asked your customers or whatever? Like a lot of your customers are doing business with you because it's harder to change, and they don't actually like doing business with you. And, you know, how do you optimize your service, your water treaters show up so that your customers are like, wow, that guy cares. I know when I see his face when he walks through the door, I know my steam system's getting taken care of, and they look forward to your monthly visits. Like how do we optimize that? And I mean, you know, what do you think about this? What do you do to optimize the customer experience so that, you know, they get excited when you walk through the door, when like, because I think customer service is becoming a commodity, but that's how the small players can win, is they bring back that handshake customer service.
Yep. Well, one thing is, I think what we're doing right now, we're talking, we're not face to face. I mean, we're a couple states away. Um, but having people and like just training people like, hey, you don't have to email everything. Everything shouldn't necessarily be on Teams. We are doing a hands-on job. Like, make sure you actually see the person before you walk in and when you walk out. Like, just have a conversation, and that breaks down so many barriers right there. Having a conversation face to face. What do our customers want? Well, have you asked them? It sounds really silly. Like, and no, I'm not saying send out a freaking survey. Don't want another survey. I swear, Eric, if I get a survey after this podcast is done, that's how did I do? And then a 0 through 10. Because how many of these things are just horrible customer service? Like, you're waiting to get your insurance. It's like, how did we do? You know what? You could just literally ask me, well, I would be happier if I didn't have to wait 10 minutes to hit a bunch of buttons to get to you to talk. That would have been better. So are you actually talking with them? Are you able to spend time, and are you doing it in a way that's not feeling rushed? And are you able to spend time and this is what I expect of my vendors. I expect you to find problems and solutions to things I didn't know yet that I was going to have a problem with, or that you provide a solution for. So catch that problem before I have it, or have that solution when I'm not even thinking about it. And I think that's kind of the goal. And so it's going to vary from customer to customer. But part of that is, being able to spend time, talk and listen.
The talk and listen, that's a huge one. I know the old people will say, "Oh, these young people, like they don't even know how to shake my hand and look me in the eyes." And you know, the one constant through all this AI innovation erasing the human experience is humans crave connection, and humans want to do business with other humans. And if we automate everything and everything becomes a machine, like there's older people retired who go to a coffee shop and pay $3, $4 to a coffee shop because they want to see other people and they want to talk to people. And that's no difference. That's not just old people. That's, the whole work from home thing. The biggest feedback is, yeah, it's nice and whatever, but I kind of miss talking to people and seeing people. And a computer, a webcam, it flattens everything. And there's a lot lost in the human experience. And, with the email thing, it's whatever, it's like 10% of the communication is actually translated. Cause, somebody can send an email and they can just like type it up and they're like, yep, good. And then somebody can be reading that and they're like, wait, is he mad at me? Like, why did he say that? And they read over these words and then they like, especially if it's like a boss, employee relationship, they're like, am I getting fired? Like, and all this stuff. And the boss could have just made a comment that was just, this random comment and never thought about it. And then the employee spends the whole weekend thinking that they're going to lose their job. Whereas a 3-minute conversation could have fixed all that. And it goes back to the customer having that conversation, having that face to face. I still believe in the human experience. And, that goes back to advertising. The best products aren't the ones that sell the most. It's the ones that people know about. And, you got to advertise, but when you walk through the door, if people are your advocate for you and for your water treatment services or boiler services, they actually like spending money with you. They actually like doing business with you. And I think that's, you can't automate that. And I think that's a major player of having time to talk to your customers. And a lot of bigger companies don't do that because that's wasted. The metrics,
Yep.
the
Goes back
metrics,
to a line item, man.
the
Line
metrics,
item.
the metrics and CFO and the bean counters say that, conversations are inefficient and they don't drive bottom line. Well, you never know what's going to come, what happens when you do an amazing job at this little customer, they got a little boiler and then that person leaves and they go to a plant with a giant steam system and they go, wait, you guys don't have a water treatment company? Oh, I know a guy. Let me call him up. Like, you never know. Like, that stuff happens all the time. So yeah, it's like this whole age of AI and digitalization, bring back the human experience. I'm a huge fan of that. And that goes to training. I think training, I would be interested. I know, shoot, we're at 2 hours already.
Yep.
Feels,
It's okay.
it feels, I mean, I could talk about this all day. And I think
So you've got a guy who also can talk about this all day. So this is kind of a problem. I'm
I,
never going to be able to hang up here.
I, 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 I appreciate the long form content. And I think that's why podcasting's taken off, is because you can kind of play out your thoughts and have inefficiencies in the conversation, and not everything's gold, but there is gold. And I've gotten so much feedback, not that tons of people listen to it, but I've had multiple people tell me, like, they're like, oh, like that conversation, I was listening to it and we're having the same problem, or, I could know his answer before he even answered and all this stuff. And like, we as an industry need to communicate more internally. Like, that's how we get better. And this podcast, that's the whole point of it. But I forget what I was going for. I went on that little tangent, but training. A lot of companies are trying to eliminate humans. Let's make this video with this AI avatar and AI speech, and it's an information presentation. And I think, while online training, there is a benefit. Nobody forces people to go log into YouTube to watch their favorite YouTuber, yet people and kids and millions of people do it. So why does corporate training have to be sterile and bland? Probably because we think about it from a corporate level instead of what do people actually want to watch? And learning doesn't have to be brutal. But for water treatment, I guess, how'd you get into it, and how'd you learn? How'd you become the expert that you are?
So I basically kind of was born into it. My dad owned a water treatment company. So I never thought I was going to be that way. I never thought I'd be interested in it. I just grew up a regular, person like thinking, oh, my dad does something and like there's like, this he does all this stuff with chemistry and I have a degree in economics. So completely outside. I've never taken a college level chemistry course, but I actually now teach two college level chemistry courses. So go figure. And it's actually a fun thing to say when I start the class, like, because they're operating engineers, they're kind of freaked out. Like, are we gonna be doing math in here? Are we doing chemistry? I'm like, all right, raise your hand if you've ever had a college level chemistry course. Notice my hand is down. So, yeah. Don't worry, we're all gonna get through this together. So I basically just kind of got hired on by him to be like, hey, he's like, you've been going through all these like kind of office sales gigs. Why don't you like, do some representing for me and, maybe like pick up a few items. And I learned very quickly, like, okay, cool. I can like represent this industry and I'm seeing all these cool factories like we were talking about. I'm going in these mechanical rooms. I'm learning what all these devices are, but I feel like I'm not learning enough. So I went through like going to some of the bigger companies, trying to like, get their whole knowledge base. And, we talk about like reading the manual. Yeah, like all these big companies have just like books and books of stuff and case studies and people to talk to. And so I kind of kept going through there and I didn't like any of the big companies' missions though. It just felt like, man, I feel like they're just kind of working to like I'm helping a customer out, but I'm also like I'm just kind of making like this push like to you have to sell more, you get fired is like, yeah, but like you guys are already making money off me. Why do you care? You know? Um, so I went to through a couple different companies and there's a thing of, some companies got too big for ones I didn't like the mission anymore. Private equity bought a couple of the companies. And so finally it was like, you know what? I have enough contacts. I can do this on my own. And so I basically just like, all right, going on my own. And the first thing I'm gonna do is call 50 friends who I've, either serviced or met over the different years. And my wife said 3 months. Like you have to have client traction. You have to have someone to start billing. You got 3 months, or else you have to go get a real job. So and I was just kind of surprised at the amount of people who were like, "Yeah, dude, come on in, quote out my facility. I might not be able to get you in right now, but we'll be able to work on this in the future." And yeah, now it's history. That's where I started, how I got to this, and my whole thing was like with doing this on my own, I'm just like, wait a minute, I get to spend as much time as I want in every site. Like I get to I don't have to like report back to someone. So if like an injection quill is broke, like I don't so injection quills are $75 each, which usually means that someone needs to get a PO for it and write the PO, and then I need to go and order it and pick it, and I need my own personal PO. And so like I'm just like, wait, I can just take one, take the old one off, put a brand new one in, and then I'll take that old one, take it back to, you can see my shop back here, and clean it out, have it ready to go. And then it's just like, just fix everything on site and be like, yeah, that's just all included in the service contract. I don't, need to do anything like that. That's kind of the way I've been running things.
No, that's good. That because it allows you to do what's best for the customer, and the while those systems are set up, you got to have systems as you scale. The inefficiencies of, I've seen it. Oh, we need a PO for everything over $100. And you're like, okay, like, can you get me a PO? Your boiler's down. Well, they went home for the day. That's not till tomorrow. It's like, okay, well, it's $150 for me to show up again. And, and there's, I have the part right here. Like, can we change? Like, no, no. So, but, that's the unfortunate side of scaling. But what was what was the conversation with your wife like when you said, "Hey, I want to take my stable job and delete it, and I want to start a company"?
Well, the greatest thing about that conversation was it wasn't the I had the choice to stay in that stable job. The choice was, oh hey, because this private equity company that bought out my last company did a bunch of stuff that I was wildly against. They got fired from a big customer and then looked at me and said, "Hey Brian, your salary is really big." So, 2 weeks, dude. So yeah, it wasn't the I have the choice to, it was the I guess I could still work there, I just wouldn't get paid sort of choice. But no, so, like, but I kind of, like, had known, like, she knew that I was, like, not happy, and so I was already had my, resume out and things like that. I was already kinda thinking about it and testing the waters, with, like, her ideas on it, and, and I'd already, like, kind of thought of, like, are there, like, other industries that are kind of like or other ways to disrupt this industry that I can do? So I'd already even pulled an LLC in testing the waters. But yeah, that final thing was like, "Oh, hey, got fired. Uh, don't worry. I'll tell you when I'm back. But hey, does your cousin still have a car that's in a garage? Because I might be needing that."
No, that's taking a bad opportunity or a bad
Hmm.
experience. You know, nobody wants to get fired, but you can learn from it, and you didn't go home and pout and been like, "Oh man, I was their best water treatment rep. They shouldn't have fired me," and all this stuff. But it's all right. How do I move on and pivot? And you started Chicago Water Treaters, and so how long are you into this now?
So we're gonna be coming up on 2 years early next year.
All right. Well,
So I think
I'll expect the invite for the two year
hell yeah.
bash. Although I didn't invite anybody to my 2-year bash, so I can't complain when I don't get an invite. But no, that's a big thing to make it a year as an entrepreneur. It's like 40% of businesses fail in the first year or something. But yeah, it's huge. I don't really have any risk. I don't have a wife and kids. I think you mentioned you had a kid, so you
Yeah.
actually have risk. You have people relying on you. I can just sleep in my car and eat PB&J. You know, I don't really care. But yeah, that's a huge thing about starting a business. But in the mechanical space, the American dream is still alive, and you being an owner operator, and like it doesn't like there's some overhead costs, but it's not like, oh, I need $10 million raised to start a factory or invest in this product. It's, hey, I have this knowledge and I can go service the customers with this knowledge, and it doesn't like the huge company costs are the scale, and I don't need scale. I want to show up, talk to my customers, do the water treatment, and yeah, and that's the business. And that's really how business was done over 50 years ago, and even today. But an owner operator shows up, and they only do business within the Chicago area or whoever, and then all of a sudden now we're putting together all these businesses, and now the company's out of Seattle and their regional office is here and their local rep is here, and nobody knows who the king in the castle is, and you have this very distant, yeah.
Although
But
no, so right now, yeah. So I'm an owner operator. Jim is an owner operator, and but we do have ambitions to basically be like, can we be this sort of beacon, like almost like a lighthouse, to be like, hey, that old model of like a small business still exists, where customers are put first. Um, we don't need to be $100 million. We don't need to be $1 billion. Like, I'd just be happy if I had every building in that background of your computer monitor there. And it's like, we're just the people you call because if you want the job done right, you know, that's that.
yeah, that's ambition. That's the other side of business is the growth at all cost. Oh, we made 100 million last year. All right, great. Now we need to make 150 million and 200 million and 300 million. And, I'm all for making money, but at a certain point in time, making more money just to make more money, it's like, all right, like, what's the point? Like, what are we, like, there is sacrifices to the growth at all
Mhm.
costs. Are we just acquiring people and acquiring companies? And that's kind of, now there were a lot of problems, but like GE used to be this mammoth company. And then through some fancy accounting, from a CEO, they are now got split into like three divisions and are not the massive blue chip company. And it's like, all right, well, how did that happen? And, they just acquired people just to acquire people and grew, growth at all costs that pleased the shareholders. And now they've gone backwards. It's like, all right,
It's also the quality, right? Like, how many of our parents had blenders that they bought like as their wedding gift and they were still using that same blender, and it wasn't like, like a blend tech or a Vitamix that was like, half a grand for a stupid blender. No, it was like just what they got at the store, for like 20 bucks. And they're still using that in their retirements. That's like still their blender. And like, I remember in college getting a blender, and yeah, it was probably a GE blender, and it broke like maybe within 3 years. So there was that, yeah. They kept on growing, 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 but also they're looking for ways, how can we make our product cheaper, cheaper, cheaper? And from that first break, that first kind of indicator then of, when they're doing cheaper products, I bet their first indicator was actually positive for them because like, hey, we're selling more than, our turnaround time on new products going out the door is actually faster. Used to be 20 years that someone would buy a blender. Now it's every 5. It's a good thing, right, guys?
planned obsolescence. Yeah. And that's,
Mhm.
yeah, they'll argue that it's made for efficiency, but, I guess a light bulb can last decades, but then they make them so that they only last however long. And yeah, there's all kinds of pros and cons to that. But I guess American manufacturing seems to be having a resurgence. What does your role in American manufacturing look like, and what does the role of water
Good
treatment in
question.
American manufacturing look like? Because I
When
know
I started, yeah. When I started, like, so I think May 2010, 2011, I swear it felt like half of every single, like, sort of like warehouse, factory quarter, in every suburb or area was like half abandoned. And there were like, we talk about help wanted signs. Weren't too many of those. There were a lot of, like, going out of business and, like, places that would have, parking lots full one day, gone the next, and it felt like for the next, like, couple of years, like, it was, like, kind of, there was that fall, and then, like, n everything was just kinda, like, stable, and then about, like, I don't know, maybe um, 5 years ago, I started getting, like, the first, like, calls where it's like, "Oh, hey, there's a new factory coming online." And, like, and this was, like, maybe just, like, right after COVID had kind of, like, so 2021, 22, and it's like, "Oh, this factory is expanding." Oh, like, we're getting the opposite call because, like, the most common thing was hearing that, like, "Oh, a factory is closing down and moving somewhere else or outsourcing." And now it seems like more and more are looking to expand. Every factory I go into seems busier than ever. They're adding on shifts. And so I do think we're at this unique pivoting point where we can continue in manufacturing, but my hope is it's done the right way. Like, people are paid to become tool operators again, right? You know, and it's an actual career where you can be a tool operator in a factory and basically walk in, get a job, get a not necessarily an official apprenticeship, but like at least have a mentor where then you're like, oh, okay, I can start like, at a decent wage and then continue my way up. Um, we'll see.
what role in American manufacturing do you have right now with what you're doing in your company?
Oh yeah. So we so all of our products, um, I mean, they're all assembled in the United States, our equipment, and so that's that, Walchem advantage. I don't know of any company that sources their microchips and their full build boards in Chicago, or not even in Chicago, but in the United States. I get a lot of calls to like outsource my sales to the Philippines or to like, somewhere abroad. Like, oh yeah, we'll have a dialer, we'll have an auto dialer. I want nothing to do with it. If anything, I'm like, no, if you can't like name the streets like where a building is at, I want nothing to do with you. Um, Me and my brother try to buy everything. So this comes down from our clothes to our tools. We try and do everything made in the US if we can find it. It is difficult, but we're trying to like say, hey, we're 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 expensing this anyways, which isn't funny money, but kind of is. Kind of is. So it's like, why don't we do everything we can to source everything in the United States? And of course, all of our chemicals, as much as they can be, are blended in the United States. I mean, like my chemical blender is 20 miles from here. So, everything that like if the nicest thing about that, if I need something fast, like I'll just call them up and it's like very old school. I will call them up and be like, "Hey, I need to come pick this thing up." Okay. Yeah, we'll have this ready. Um, my my main equipment distributor, he doesn't manufacture, but just a distributor. When I first opened the account with him, it was so refreshing. He just said, "Well, so how we run everything is like, not needing to get like any sort of references. You buy from us, you pay us, then you can buy from us again and you pay us again, and we just keep doing that. And that's our reference." Like, does not happen anymore.
That works for me.
Yeah. And I'm like, I don't have to fill out another form. You don't have to check my credit, which it doesn't exist yet.
What what kind of American manufacturing do you support with your services?
So that would be chemical blending for the most part, because that is our biggest raw material, right? So,
Yeah,
most of
but
our
like
chemistries.
on the customer side.
Oh, customer side. Yeah. So the biggest thing is plastics and injection molding. Um, that would be the biggest dollar amount. Food processing would be another really big one because, like, literally, like, it does not make sense to cook food and ship it across the country. Like, because, like, literally, we'd be growing it here, shipping it to, like, another country where they'd cook it and then they'd ship it back. So we grow so much here, so it makes sense. Like, we grow it, we process it, we sell it in the same country. And then plastics injection molding, a lot of our stuff, like, and these are consumables from food consumables, like think plastic spoons, cups, forks, um, all of that sort of stuff that is one-time use is all going to be need cooling. So you've got that. And then of course, you've also got my personal favorite, which is beer. So if anyone owns a distillery out there as well, we're trying to add our first distillery on. We haven't yet, but I have a lot of breweries. So,
I did a startup for a small distillery. And yeah, that's one of the cool ones, especially when it's a distillery that's like owner operator and the owner's like a geek for it. And he's like, "Oh, let me show you the process."
everything.
And,
Hmm.
you're just like being walking through this, like, they're like, "Oh, this, and then it comes out here. We do this, and we have the tower, we have the lights and all this stuff." And you're like, "This is cool." But the average person doesn't see that. And it's like, how is anybody supposed to know? But yeah, that's, yeah, just, I
Well, I
find
mean,
that,
look at like these distilleries though. So when I did my bachelor party 14 years ago, most distilleries did not charge for a tour. Nowadays, it's usually between $10 to $20, and this is in Louisville. I go there like probably twice a year, to go to different distilleries, and just like have a better selection of like more rare stuff that's hard to find. And like, so people are willing to pay to see how things are produced.
Yeah, I know the whole like Bourbon Trail thing is a
Yeah.
big thing. Yeah, there's a lot of boilers down there at the
And
distilleries.
towers.
Yeah.
A lot of
Last
water going through all of them.
last question I got for you, and then we'll wrap this up. If you were 18 or so, 20, or even any age, and you didn't
Mhm.
have water treatment experience, but you sounded interested, how would you get into the industry?
Great question. I would say so. We're both loud on LinkedIn. Message like find someone who is like, don't message HR. Like, uh, in fact, that's my advice for everyone. Don't message HR. Look at someone who's like, either a manager or a tech, and message that person. Like from person to person, like, hey, I saw what you did. I just wanted to see if like I had interest in what you do, and if that would be all, if that would be something that works for me. Um, could you have a time to like, set up a phone conversation? I don't know anyone who would not be just like thrilled like you and I are. Like, wait, you want to know what I do? Like what I spend most of my time doing? Hell yeah. Give me a call. You want to do a ride day with me? I will buy you lunch. Like, you know?
Yeah, that's
So that
a
would be my recommendation.
yeah, that's a good thing about when you get people that love what they do. They want to tell others. They're
Mhm.
advocates. What industry events that are open to the public can you go to? Conferences? I don't know AW.
AUT is not open to the public. It's a pricey one. Yeah. It's more geared just for water treaters. And there's not even like end users that go to that. WevTech, the big water conference that just happened, that one's also super pricey. I didn't go to it because I'm like, I don't know if I don't want to blow like I think it was like $300 to walk the show. And I'm like, that's kind of pricier than I want to do just to, spend a couple hours in between client calls. Um, so yeah, there's not very many of these. Occasionally there are tours of like water wrecks and wastewater sites, but that's still not quite our niche. Like when people think of water, they're more thinking of drinking water or wastewater. They're not thinking of processed water, which I always say is, you leave something metal outside and it rusts. Well, the same thing happens with your pipes that are transferring water. So we just have to do stuff to make sure it doesn't. And that stuff is my job.
Yeah, but that's something to think about if you are
Mhm.
part of these industry events. Is somebody
Yeah,
inside the industry doesn't have an event off the top of their mind that says, you know what, a new person, if you're interested, it's easy for you to come to this. You know, like that's because we think all these industries think inward, and
you're right.
especially so I mentioned to your brother, there's AHR. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's the biggest HVAC one. I mean, like it
Hmm.
comes to Chicago and fills up the McCormick Center. But it's in Las Vegas in end of January this year. But all these conferences, no children under 18 years old allowed. It's like, okay. So the first exposure to the industry, they have to be out of high school. All right. No wonder we don't have people in the industry because, wait, you're telling me we can't bring people in when all these manufacturers spend hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars on these booths, and you're telling me we can't bring in young people to like, hey, like, look what daddy does, look what mommy does, like, this is the cool stuff, all because we're so worried about maintaining this corporate level of, oh, we got to all act like this is all we do, and we have to maintain this corporate level of, whatever, and we're here to sell and all this stuff. And it's like, okay, but the number one issue across the industry is we don't have enough people. So
There's Yeah, so like we started this off also talking about schools. You have a boiler right there in that school that you can bring the kids down to. You can show them the boiler room. Oh, you see that radiator you have? This is how it gets hot. And look, there's no electricity. There's no motor that's powering that. That's what you talked about. Gas moves itself. So, like, there's all of these lessons that you can start doing here. The chemistry class, you want to show the difference don't tell me a solid, is a smaller, compact molecule and a gas is excited. Show me. And actually, that's one thing I do on my teaching. I say there's like three types of learning. There's doing, seeing, and reading. And like literally 1% of the population can learn by reading. You can read a manual, but so those are in bite size, but you can't learn a whole trade by reading. And if like basically the people who are very good at reading, you already know about them, they went to Harvard. Like, there are those people who are so good at studying, like, they read through something once and they remember it all. They remember all the concepts, and most humans aren't like that. We need to see, we need to feel, we need to experience in order to have that aha moment where it's like, "Oh, this all now makes sense."
See, feel, and experience. That's a good way to end the episode. You got to see what you're doing, feel what you're doing, and experience what you're doing, and tell others. Get active. How do people find you?
Yeah, good question. So, Google Chicago water treaters because you could go to chicagowt.com, but let's face it, you're all going to Google it anyway. So, my name and number is out there. I'm Brian Burgess. Not hard to find, also on Strava. So if you want to follow that, you can do that too. So all sorts of different ways. Um, yeah,
You active on LinkedIn?
extremely.
Yeah.
So you can look at Chicago Water Treaters, and we've got that. And then you can, yeah, find me on LinkedIn. And yeah, anyone who is under 18 who wants to go on a ride day ever with a parental permission slip, we can get it done.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you're in the Chicago area looking for water treatment services, or you're a water treater and just want to grow your network, reach out to him. He is a wealth of information, student of the industry, and will, yeah, talk your ear off,
Apparently,
which is great. That's what we need. Well, I
yeah,
appreciate you coming on. Thank you
I
for coming on
appreciate
the Boiler
being
Wild
on.
podcast.